Okay. Let's call this meeting the order. Senate Rules Committee on this Thursday, 28th day of January, 2021. Let's proceed. We got 3 different rules to review here tonight. Senator Roth, let's start with you in order for later.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we should do roll call first.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about
procedure. No worries.
Yeah. Ian, do you want to do roll call?
Senator Driscoll.
Oh, Anthony, go ahead.
Senator Driscoll.
Excuse me, I was digging for amendments. What are we at?
Roll call.
Your roll call. Are you present?
Yeah, I'm present. I'm just trying to find my amendments. Sorry.
Senator Giroux.
Here.
Senator Hicks.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Chairman Dockstander.
Here. Let's proceed now to Minority Floor Leader Rothfuss for your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President, Ian sent us an email at 2:19 p.m. today, if you've got your electronic information in front of you. And that email at 2:19 has all 3 of the amendments attached because Ian is awesome like that. So
he's always awesome. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Go ahead, though.
Thank you. This is a really short amendment, and it's something I think I've discussed with most of you. The concept here is we have in the Wyoming Constitution, Article 3, Section 20, that no bill shall be so altered or amended on its passage to the Senate as to change its original purpose. So we know we live by that, but we only have it in the Constitution. And since it's not in a rule, and it's not exactly the same as germaneness, you can't actually challenge it as this amendment is out of order because it's not within the title of the bill, even though we do that sometimes. We call it germaneness, but in actuality, when you look at germaneness in Masons, germaneness doesn't have to be consistent with the title of the bill. If it's, for example, if the bill is a decrease in taxes, it would be germane to increase that tax, even though it would not be appropriate with the Constitution. So I just ask that this be drafted. This is something I think everyone here has been involved with discussions and debates over the past many years. Certainly, this has come up several times in the decade I've been in the legislature, and it's hit Rules Committee a few times. And it just seems like it would be useful if we have an amendment that is not within the title of the bill, that would be a point of order, and that we can then rule on it. We can ask the chair, is this consistent with, is this an appropriate amendment within the scope of the bill title? And the chair could then rule yes or no, and then the Rules Committee could make a decision, and then it would go to the body. Whereas right now, everyone will probably recall, we simply say, well, it's a constitutional issue, so we'll leave it up to the courts. It's really not up to us. And we hem and we haw for a while, and then it sort of fizzles away. So I thought maybe this year, if everyone's interested, we could change it. It's pretty straightforward, just restating the Constitution. And if we want it as a rule, we can do it. If we don't want it as a rule, then we won't do it.
Folks, we are on Senate Rule 11.6, 11.0 amendment, 11.6 scope of amendments, just described by Senator Roth with Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, and I remember several of these discussions over the years. Do you think if we had adopted this or had this in place that it would have changed the outcome of the decision that came out of the Rules Committee?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, yes, on a few occasions, I remember the Rules Committee saying basically, there was one, I'm going to say 8 years ago, and I don't remember what it was about, but I remember us sitting in President's office off the chamber and everyone saying, yeah, that's not consistent with the title, but it is germane. And we went back to the floor and basically said that. And I feel like we've done that a few other times, and that was what was announced. Yeah, it's not within the title, but it is germane.
Does that have anything to do with hunting bison with automatic weapons?
Yes, that was it. When was that?
Not that long ago. It has happened more than once, though.
No, we do. We've done it a few times, but I remember that, Senator. That's right. That was quite a long time ago. Was that your amendment?
That was Senator Bebout's amendment.
That was Bebout's.
Was it?
I believe you didn't think it was germane to the bill, if my recollection is correct, and ask for a rules committee ruling on it. But I do think that's the one that you think that might.
All right,
have
that's
been
the one that's
changed.
keeping me up at night. Yeah, that sounds right. I remember that, Senator. Absolutely. The other thing I'll say, incidentally, is the House doesn't interpret it like we do. The House doesn't need this rule because their historical interpretation of germaneness is if it's not within the title, it's not germane. And since that's their tradition, they don't need this rule.
So where does that put us, Senator?
We don't have that tradition. And apparently we started it with a bison.
Who would remember? We are on 11.6 of amendments. Further discussion, please. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here's why I watched last year. There was rules. It wasn't my bill. As a matter of fact, it was the president's, or it was a bill the president was against, and other 3 members of the rule committee were co-sponsors. And then when they called for a rules committee meeting, they walked up there and the president was sitting there going, well, since 3 people are going to say it's germane because they wanted to, and that was kind of the end of it. And I kind of watched that, and I started thinking about this year, and we got a lot of people that may have different ideas about this. And I was just wondering if it wouldn't be not a bad idea to try even if we just tried it for 1 year, to try to tighten that up just a little bit. Because to me, from an observer's point of view, from a member's point of view watching, it seemed like it was a little bit on the arbitrary side, how it got decided what was germane and what wasn't. It was basically kind of up to the individual opinions of the people on the rules committee. And so, like I say, that I didn't feel like they were pointing at something to say, here's why. And I thought this would help that at least. And then, like I say, with the members, it's kind of maybe try to build a tradition and say, this is what we want to do. But then again, I can understand if you want to have ultimate leeway, you just say, well, it is what we say it is. And that's kind of the way it appears now sometimes, from my view.
No bill should be altered or amended on its passage through the Senate as to change its original purpose.
Yeah, and Mr. President, that's a direct quote from the Constitution. And so that's true. And that was why I asked Ian to draft it that way. I mean, it's certainly not my policy. That was the framers of the Wyoming Constitution created that policy. So we adhere to it, but we don't have it as a rule. So we can't run it through our process of appeal to the chair, rules committee, and decision.
Mr. Vice President, you had a hand up.
Yeah, and I'm not going to take a position that you know, that what Chris's or Senator Rothfuss or Guru is saying is wrong. It is Constitution. I don't know why we have to have a rule to reiterate the Constitution. Clearly, we have that obligation anyway. And I'm not convinced that the rule would change the outcome because it's still going to be a subjective ruling from the people involved. But I don't disagree with anything that the 2 senators have said. Whether we adopt it as a rule or we don't adopt it as a rule, and we do, it's still going to be a subjective judgment by the Rules Committee as to whether it's germane or not. And at some point in time, if we go beyond what that constitutional limit is, I would anticipate that we'll get challenged. And so, not arguing the point, I just don't think it's necessary when we already have the constitutional prohibition to do it anyway. It's kind of like a belt and the suspenders aspect, and I'm not so sure we need the suspenders to go with the big belt.
Mr. Floor Leader, weigh in, please.
Majority Leader or minority?
Oh, no, majority.
Gotcha.
There we go.
Al, I'm kind of the same. I'm not sure it really matters either way. They're going to rule however. It's probably what you ought to be bringing is that you have a conflict if you're co-sponsored on the bill and you're on the rules committee would be more appropriate.
Well, Mr. President, getting back to the bison example, actually, it would have made a difference on that one to the vice president's question, because I'm remembering now that discussion. And the president at the time, President Ross, basically said that he didn't think it was consistent with the title of the bill, but in his view, it was germane based on the Mason's definition of germane. And so we came back in the chamber and said, this may not be constitutional. That's up to the body to decide. But pursuant to Mason's, it is germane. So in that instance, I think it would have changed the outcome, where the Rules Committee, if this rule were there, would have said, this is not consistent with the original purpose of the bill.
Consistent with the Constitution.
Yeah. And again, the constitutionality, the challenge there of relying on the constitutionality is that we wait for the courts to decide that. And Senator Hicks is exactly right. It might not stand up. And did we pass that bison thing? Did that, I wonder what, did we? Okay. Well, the courts probably never had an opportunity to review it. I don't remember reading the case. But again, we swear an oath to the Constitution also. And I personally am not a big fan of the let's leave it up to the courts. We do whatever the hell we want and let the courts decide. That just doesn't seem consistent with my oath of office.
I'm not necessarily opposed to this. Anybody else want to weigh in? We've got a long one coming up that we need to address.
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to it at all.
Vice President Hicks?
Yeah, the other issue is that getting back to the constitutional, as my recollection, if there's a question, and if there was a question to germaneness on a bill and it violated that provision in the Constitution, it's the body then has the opportunity to vote on whether it's constitutional or not. So there is a remedy in place to address that issue, as I understand it. So I see that minority floor leader shaking his
I'm
head.
agreeing with you, but the minority floor leader is giving you a head shake. No.
Yeah, Mr. President, there's no appeal to the body on constitutionality. Constitutionality is a part of our final vote. So that's the only appeal. We couldn't appeal. I find this unconstitutional and I ask the body for a judgment. That's out of order. And this makes it in order for this one concept. And that's actually the purpose. If we had that ability to appeal constitutionality, I wouldn't need to bring this in any way.
All right. Probably leaning into it at this point. Ian, are we allowed to ask you to weigh in?
No. You can ask him, but if he's very smart, he won't say anything.
That's exactly right. Very good. Mr. Chairman, I think it's a policy question. And as Senator Rothfuss has brought up, I mean, there is a distinction in that, the body does not weigh on constitutional issues. Rather, it is reflected in their vote. So if you wanted a procedural way to do that as a basis in the rules, then you would want to pass this rule.
Follow up, Senator Guru or Senator Driscoll?
Well, I guess like I say, to me it just reinforces something. It tightens it up. It gives us something we can point at and say, this is why we voted this way. And it's easier than it, just like I say, I think it just gives us a tool to use to be able to lean on and say that. My first Speaker Harshman always told us in the House when I first got there, he said, we decide what's constitutional by our vote. When we vote it out, it's constitutional. Like if someone in a big black robe down the street interprets that later, if it was or not in fact. But at the time when we pass things, we decide what's constitutional by our vote. So I'm in favor of this.
Senator Driscoll?
I have no problem with it. I guess I'll be in favor of it. I'm fine.
All right. Thank you, Ian. Call for the vote. Do I have a motion for it?
Move the amendment.
All right. Second. There's a second. All in favor say aye or give me a hand.
Aye.
3, 4. All opposed. Okay.
Mr. President, I think we might roll call that on Rules Committee, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that correct, Ellen? Roll call then, please.
Senator Driscoll,
Aye.
Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
No.
Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Chairman Dockstetter.
Bill up for our consideration. Are we allowed to bring Senator Kinski in, or?
Yes, Mr. President, I will bring him in right now. Also, just real quick, we have a Shannon Anderson in the attendees portal as well. And I would just remind her that if she would like to comment, to please raise her hand so that we know that she has a public comment.
Ms. Anderson? Yeah. What's the call there?
No public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. All right, Senator Kinski, you've gone to a lot of work here for Joint Rule 17.1B. Would you like to explain it?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may. This is a rule that has a great deal of thought has gone into it. It's addressing two things at heart. Both have the same underlying phenomena, which is that on committees, the House outnumbers the Senate, and that lopsided voting very often results in what's colloquially referred to as a cram down. But what it ends up doing is, I think, interferes with the efficient flow of legislation. I think the budget bill is probably the most germane example. We've had experiences where our House colleagues will load a bill up with spending that's approved by a 7-5 vote, 7 for the House, 5 for the Senate. And then rather than resolving it right there in committee, trying to kick out a bill that represents the will of both bodies, it comes out encumbered with a series of amendments that staff has to track so that we can just strip them all out again on the Senate. And then we go to conference committee and you negotiate them out at the end of the session, instead of in December when the Joint Appropriations Committee is meeting and really should be resolving those issues at that time. So the first part of this is an amendment that says our rules, the rules we have that are temporary and then permanent, the default rules, will be that it takes a majority of both sides to amend a bill as well as to adopt a bill. And you can see that in the 17.1B, the last sentence, which says adoption of alternative rules by a joint interim committee under subsection shall require a majority vote of the appointed members from each house serving on the committee. And then if you go down to Appendix A, the sample interim committee rules, or as I call them, the default rules, and you turn to the second page, it says the quorum necessary for an interim committee to transact business shall be a majority of the members from each house who are appointed to serve on the committee, except as provided here, and a majority may act. And then the last sentence, operative sentence, a majority vote of the appointed members from each house serving on the committee is required to sponsor legislation and to approve amendments to draft legislation. So what we're telling the committees is, don't use the lopsided advantage of one side to just cram through amendments, work it out in committee, and then bring something that looks like a consensus product to the table. So then the other part of it deals with management council. As you know, there's two things rattling around in this rule. The first is that sometimes there's an overwhelming vote that overrides the will of what we think is a majority of the Senate. And so this is saying that both the Senate and the House have to concur in certain specified actions. Originally, I had thought of looking at just saying it required a majority of both bodies for any management council action, and staff pointed out 90 to 95% of what management council does is perfunctory, ministerial, approving bills, approving payments. And so we teased out what are the most consequential actions. So those you see in C, where it requires a majority of both bodies, House and Senate. One is an amendment to or final sponsorship of draft legislation. So similar to what's happening to any committee in this proposed rule. 2, approval of any interim study topic for a joint interim committee, select committee or task force, or reassignment of a topic. 3, creation of a select committee or task force. 4, adoption of the legislative session calendar or rule change, and then adoption or amendment of any policy and so forth. So the one example that jumps out, I think, is there was a task force that was a bill that passed the House, went to the Senate, and it just went down in a fiery defeat. And then after adjournment, the Management Council reconstituted the task force over the objection of the Senate. And so it just really frustrates the purpose of having a bicameral legislature if you've got a unicameral body that can just exert its will that way. And so this is intended to reinsert into the Management Council a more balance and equity between the two bodies. And again, make sure that the will of both is respected, that we don't have a numeric advantage that simply overrides the contemplated constitutional scheme of a separate House and a separate Senate voting separately and requiring the concurrence of both to get anything done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I was looking for that word balance and you hit it, and I like this piece of proposed rule change. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did you all, this is all brand new material that you brought in, those 5 points?
Mr. Chairman, I can't say it's brand new. I think it is the result of a back and forth with staff. I think staff was, staff can't get in the middle of these things, and they're kind of the Rodney King in this whole deal. Can't we all just get along? But I think what was pointed out to me was that 95% was the figure that was used by Director Obrick of what Management Council does is just paying bills and I don't know much about Management Council. I don't know what all their business is, but he said most of it is not really something that's subject to controversy, and if you can't get a full quorum of both bodies, you just want to be able to keep business going. So I think I was pressed to outline what I thought were the most consequential things, and that's what 1 through 5 represents, Mr. Chairman.
You lead into with a majority vote of appointed members from each House. Back it up again at the end. Comment on this, folks?
Mr. President.
I think Senator Rothfuss had his hand up first, and then Senator Driscoll. Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did just have a couple of questions, and specifically on the Management Council. A couple of things came to mind when I was reading this before. The first is that the chairmanship, Management Council is weird because it's a chairmanship and a vice chairmanship as opposed to co-chairman. And the extra member of Management Council goes with the vice chair side to offset what is theoretically perceived as additional power of having the chairmanship for the 2 years of the legislative session. And that's because of the outvote concept is sort of the basis of that. And I'm curious, unfortunately it would be a statutory change, but if you adopt this and you create parity, you don't any longer need the chairman, vice chairman system. You go to 2 co-chairmen, which I've always thought is a hell of a lot better of a system anyway. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, whether you'd thought that through. That does require, I think, a statutory change, though. It does, if I'm not mistaken. But I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, Senator.
Sure, on the statutory change, but it says Senator Kiske.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, a statutory change is much more difficult than a rule change. I was proposing this as a way to see how this shakes out, works out. We can always reverse it if it's not what we thought.
Okay.
And you can, in theory, in a statutory change, but it's much more difficult. This, I think, is we've seen some bills dealing with Management Council composition, mired in controversy, couldn't get through, and this is a sort of a lesser path to try and get to that concept of parity.
That's overdue. Senator Driscoll.
Thank you. I'd like to echo a good part of it. I do think rules is better than trying to do a statutorial change. I think this is one place that we all ought to be able to agree. Let's side on the Senate side and get this up and at least have the good discussion with them. Who knows where it ends, but I think this is a really a good first step. I thank Senator Kinski because I don't think it's extreme. It's just a good, reasonable ask for parity. And I think this does that, and it does it in a balanced way. So I'm not kind of for it. I'm really for it. And I'm hoping we unanimously come out so that we can represent our side that way.
Go back to Senator Rothfuss, and I'd like Senator Hicks and Senator Grew to be ready to weigh in. Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, thanks. I had one more question about the subpoint 4. Adoption of a legislative session calendar makes sense, or a proposed rule change for a legislative session. Should that have joint rule change as opposed to rule change? Because obviously we wouldn't want we would never want to bind ourselves to a requirement of management council to make Senate rules. So unless I'm missing the intent there, I would suggest inserting joint before rule change.
Senator Kinski, you want to respond, or you want staff to weigh in?
Mr. Chairman, I'm inclined to believe it's a friendly amendment because I don't believe anything management council could do anything with respect to the rules of either house. The Constitution's clear, the Senate and the House each make their own rules. So I think if management council tried to propose a change to Senate or House rules, it will be way beyond its charge. I think all they can do is propose, well, I don't know on these COVID sessions. Maybe the management council did propose changes to Senate and House rules. Maybe I should let staff weigh in.
Ian, have you got a moment? Oh, Matt.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, members of Rules Committee. Yeah, when I drafted that, my only time I'm aware of where management council proposed any rule change was during the lead up to the May special session. And that was simply a joint rule. But what we did in that joint rule was, we notwithstood all sorts of House and Senate rule provisions within that joint rule. So that's why when I drafted this, I used the broader language of any proposed rule change. Now, my guess is, it will always come out in the format of a joint rule, but it could impact House and Senate rules as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kinski, are you agreeable with that?
I am. And Mr. Chairman, I also want you to know that I really appreciate Matt's efforts and Ian's efforts. I've been pressing forward on this thing, and it really places staff in a difficult position. And I think they've been masterful in trying to satisfy what I want while keeping some of my baser instincts at bay.
Before we talk about base instincts, Senator Brewer, please.
I brought that up to bingo to me. Okay.
Senator Vice President Hicks, or Senator Grew, were you going to speak, or
Let the Vice President.
Vice President?
I was just wondering if it took the whole LSO staff to keep instincts at bay.
I'm just glad they were there.
I've seen them and they're a lot.
Senator Grew.
I'm inclined to agree. I think that it's worth a try. I think that I have heard Senator Kinski and the Vice Presidents talk about some of their frustrations with over the years with management council, and I think that this might go some, and then we've all talked about the cram down and the 7-5 deal and the whole deal. So I'm certainly think it's worth a broader discussion. I appreciate the fact that he brought it. I appreciate the fact that the staff was willing to give it a whirl to try to, and we're not trying to pick a fight with anybody, but we're just trying to, I think he's right in a way to say that we got to try to move the ball down the field a little bit easier sometimes than we do. Because boy, I tell you, that it gets hard. So I'm inclined to agree.
Okay, well overdue. We're rounding this up. Senator Driscoll, any other comments? Senator Driscoll, any other comments?
No.
Okay. All right, anybody else with a good cause? Okay, the way I understand it, then we do have an amendment. We move it, an amendment.
Well, Mr. Chairman, maybe just let's talk about a procedural. This is actually to your joint rule. So it would be a recommendation that you make tomorrow with your joint meeting to your House counterparts, that you adopt this joint rule for presentation to both bodies.
All right,
So
do
I
we
think
need
that
to,
would be the appropriate motion. Is just
do we need to put in the amendment though, as it leaves our body, number 4?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't catch that.
Senator Rothfuss had a proposed change to number 4.
Mr. President, no, I was satisfied. Sorry, I didn't speak afterwards. Matt's explanation I thought was fully satisfactory of why we would have the language we have, and to the extent that it's a proposed rule change as opposed to an actual rule change, it's going to go through the whole floor process, and the individual rules committees acting separately anyway. So I see the logic and have no further concern on that.
All right, Matt, could you give us one more time the summary of how we move this out then?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think what I would suggest to you is that a motion would be in order to support the adoption of this joint rule by the House and Senate Joint Rules, or House and Senate Rules Committee meeting jointly tomorrow. So it could be the Senate Rules Committee support for the adoption of this rule before the Rules Committee tomorrow, the joint meeting tomorrow.
Support or recommend, Matt? Sorry.
Go ahead. Senator.
Support or recommend would be better. What?
I'd say recommend adoption. That is better, Senator.
Recommend adoption of joint rule in 1B. Do we have a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Senator Guru, second. Okay, Senator Driscoll. All right. Motion, do we want a roll call with this as well? Ellen? Or who do we want?
You know, I don't think this one needs a roll call.
All right. All those in favor say aye. Give me a hand. Okay, any opposed? All right, Senator Kinski, good job. Way to do your homework. Just have one.
All right, thank you. I'd love to stay for the rest of the meeting, but I have a piece of chicken waiting for me.
Actually, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Included in my motion is that Senator Kinski comes to the Rules Committee and presents his motion. I just want to make sure that was included.
Friendly amendment, Senator Kinski.
So we
All right, I'll be
Enjoy your chicken tonight because you have duties tomorrow. Okay.
all right. I'll be there. Thanks.
Yeah. All righty. Next up for our consideration. This one just kind of looks like housekeeping as I understand it then. 1.4, procedural parliamentary authority. Temporary legislative facilities during the period when the legislature is housed or holds legislative sessions in the Jonah Business Center in Cheyenne, words the state capital or capital when used in these rules shall be understood to mean the Jonah Business Center. So we're just switching it back, correct, staff? Simple. Anything I'm missing here? Anybody have any conversation on this? Comment? Ian, did you want to add anything?
Not at all, Mr. Chairman. It's simply an obsolete provision in the rules at this point, so we'd suggest that you consider getting rid of it.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, I'll just move that we repeal Rule 1-4, the Senate rules.
Moved and seconded by Senator Grew. All in favor, say aye.
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 Point of
Opposed?
order, that's one that we would need to
Vote.
have a roll call on.
Ellen, help us out there and then give us a roll call. Anthony.
Senator Driscoll,
I kind of like the Jonah, but aye.
Senator Guru,
Hated the Jonah. Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Detested the Jonah. Aye.
Senator Rothfuss,
Loathe the Jonah. Aye.
Chairman Dockstader.
I'm in complete agreement with my minority floor leader. Loathe it. Aye. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Is there anything else for the good of the cause? Staff, folks, anybody? Oh, the Jonah.